Hello, everybody. Good evening. I'm Cecily Cullen, and I'm the director and curator here at the Center for Visual Art. The CVA is the off-campus gallery for MSU Denver, and we engage the community and students through contemporary exhibitions, immersive education programs, and workforce development for those who are interested in creative careers. I would like to acknowledge the privilege we have to gather in this place, once the territories and homelands of so many Indigenous people, including the Arapaho and Cheyenne nations. We respect the many diverse Indigenous people still connected to this land and value the knowledge systems they have developed in relationship to their lands. I would also like to recognize and thank Meow Wolf for sponsoring tonight's event. And Brandon Vargas for collaborating with CVA's education manager, Katie Taft, in organizing tonight's panel. We're thrilled to have all of these speakers and can't wait to hear from each of you and learn more about your work and your influences. Now I have the honor of introducing our first speaker, Carlos Fresquez, who's standing here behind me. And then Carlos will introduce the rest of our speakers. I have worked with Carlos for over 20 years. We've been friends and colleagues for 20 years. So there's no way I can talk about everything Carlos has done, or I would be talking all night. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about him. But the influence and positive impact Carlos has had on MSU Denver is immeasurable. Starting from his time as a student in the 1970s, then as a professor for over 30 years. He has encouraged students to have courage in creating their work by taking risks and believing in their artwork, speaking to their own truths. He has led his students by example. Carlos's work is important to the Chicano community, the contemporary art community, and anyone who cares about social justice. He challenges viewers to question what we see, what information is fed to us, and the narratives we've been told. There's so many things he has done, and I'm just going to tell you a couple. He's a member of Los Fantasmas.
Fantasmas.
Oh, thank you. Collective, and founder of a new gallery, Loya Art Space, which I hope he'll tell us a little bit about. He's widely collected. He's done lots of public art, including 4 public art pieces this year. His papers will be part of the Smithsonian Archive of American Art. In 2016, he received the NewSed Civil Rights Award, and in 2018, the Bonfils Stanton Foundation Artist Award, honoring him for his significant and meaningful contributions to the cultural fabric of Colorado. Please welcome Carlos Fresquez.
Well, thank you everyone for showing up tonight, attending. We're hoping we offer you a little insight, a little history. I'd like to thank the CVA for giving this space for us this evening, and also Meow Wolf and Brandon for funding this. We really appreciate that. It's nice when I taught for over 33 years, I always reminded students, try not to do so much work for free. Try to, get paid for these gigs, and these people that you do go work with, they should compensate you somehow. So I'm going to preface this talk here with a little information about just identity. And so if I may, but what I have here is a little symbol that I found online probably 5-6 years ago. It says illegal immigration started in 1492. So I want you to think about that as we're sitting here talking about our histories, our artwork, and our experiences. So with that, I'd like to start with what I'm calling go back where you've come from. This is a First Peoples map, and I myself am half Indigenous, half European, and I really believe that most Latinos Hispanics, what we're going to call mostly Latinos. Hispanics would be more from España or Spain, but the Latinx or Latin peoples are mostly mixed people. We are of indigenous blood, and when we hear things like they're illegal, so to me it's like, how can they be illegal on their own land? America, we have to remember, is a continent, not the name of our country. I was in Mexico several years ago, and I said, yeah, I'm from America. And they go, well, so are we. And that's what kind of struck me, like, oh yeah, you're right. You know, I'm from the United States of America. The word Hispano is a term used in the Southwest, and Hispanic actually translates to Hispano. It's a person descended from the Spanish settlers in the Southwest before it was annexed to the US. And the word annex is used loosely here. I should have put in there stolen. In 1930s, when the Pew Research was looking at the census, they realized that the U.S. Census included all people of Latino descent as Mexican. And so that was obviously, hopefully corrected, right? The word Hispanic began used in the U.S. in the 70s. Up until all that moment, all Hispanics and Latinos simply have been counted as white. So we finally were counted on the census as our heritage. And I remember the first time I was called Hispanic, and I thought, well, that's better than me called what I was called prior as a wetback, a dirty Mexican, a beaner, taco bender, or a spick. So I guess I'd rather be called Hispanic. Hispanic is actually a code word for the white man's panic, his panic. Hispanic is very European and denies our indigenous heritage. Harry Gamboa, I love this quote, I hiss, they panic. And now the term is used as Rameriez Latinx. And the thing for me is like, I really don't speak Latin. You know, I barely speak Spanish, to tell you the truth. So to me, it's like, this is something that we need to discuss and we can talk about more after our presentations. The term Latino reemerged in English, appearing in books in 1973, actually in the Black Panthers newspaper. What I do like about it, Latino, it de-emphasizes the connection to Spain, because I am not just of European descent, only Spanish. I am indigenous. So what is the correct term for me to use for myself, my own identity? So the word Chicano came about in the 70s, is which I personally prefer. And people have asked me like, well, what are you? What should we call you? And that's the appropriate thing to do. It's best just to ask, just assuming that you would call me Hispanic, call me Latino, Latinx. What would you prefer to be called? I think that's just the appropriate thing to do. And Chicano was actually a negative term. My parents told me that when I was a kid during the Chicano movement, when I first demonstrated in 1969. And Carlos Santistevan is going to talk a bit more about his experience with the Crusade for Justice and Jorge Gonzalez. But it was a very negative term, and we as Chicanos turned it around and flipped it and claimed it as a term to define ourselves, because we are both a Mexican and of the U.S. As Mexican American, I feel sometimes that I'm living on that hyphen. So maybe this is more appropriate as to how I should experience or see myself. I feel that I'm almost on, as this hyphen's almost like I'm on a high wire act, holding the balance bar to straddle across our society to be able to fit in and utilize what this country has to offer me, which was given to us during the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. My last name Fresquez was first documented in Santa Fe in 1617. As I said earlier, my DNA is pretty much 50-50. In Mexico, February 1st, 1848, that big red X is where my family is pretty much from, northern New Mexico, in Santa Fe. Again, 1617. So on February 2nd, 1848, the US signed the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and all citizens of half of the country that the US stole from Mexico became US citizens. So my family fell asleep February 1st as Mexican citizens, woke up the next day with that treaty being signed as US citizens. The border crossed us. We did not cross the border. And then I'm always told, go back where I've come from. Okay, with that, I'd like to start our talks here. Again, I want to thank CVA and Meow Wolf. I forgot who I put here first. Oh, Cindy. Let's see. Artist. We got Cindy, Abraham, and Carlos Santistevan. Actually, I put Carlos Santistevan first. Okay, so we'll go with that. Are you ready, Carlos?
I guess I'm ready.
Well, let me just say a little something about Carlos. I first met Carlos in the late 70s. I was a Metro student, Metro alum, graduated from Metro in 1980. When I graduated, the school did not have any kind of course in place to have like an art survival, like a thesis class. So I never took anything like that. I did my last courses, graduated. I gathered all my artwork I created, tossed it into my vehicle, and drove off. And it's like, now what? And I was on my own to find my way through the art community and art world. And so I heard about this organization called CHAC, C-H-A-C, Chicano Humanities and Arts Council. It was an art gallery set up for the Chicano Latino community, which Carlos will talk more about that. And Carlos was the first director. And so I went to the gallery, met Carlos there, paid my dues and became a member, and first started exhibiting there in 1979. And so Carlos has been very active in the community. He worked at the Crusade for Justice and worked with Corky Gonzalez. He actually started the first Chicano art gallery in the United States, the first Chicano art gallery in the United States. And he himself will tell a bit more about his history. And with that, I'd like to present Carlos Santistevan.
I'd like to do that myself. We are considered we are the invisible Americans. As artists, we are more invisible. And the only time we're seen, if we're lucky, is during National Hispanic Cultural Week. And so I'm sort of Ma Wolf, and for this organization to do it, not during that period, but after, is me that gives us that we are artists 24/7, not just during National Hispanic Week. So that understanding that, then we have to understand who we are and where we came from. But let me go back to also thanking Ma Wolf, because they're artist driven. And I think that that's important, because we may be artists, but only some of us are administrators. Some of us were forced to become administrators. Not that we wanted to, but because we were. Going back to this whole Chicano thing, my parents, my dad was from New Mexico, Trinidad. My mother, she was raised in an orphanage from El Paso. She came to Denver. But so when I was young, we considered ourselves Spanish American. And that's because what they called us. And when Jorge Gonzalez started involvement, my mother got me involved in politics. I got in the war on poverty. And I remember she said, I want you to come with me and meet Jorge Gonzalez. I said, no, the guy's a troublemaker. You know, he's just making a lot of, I don't want to do it. She said, well, tell you what, I'll take you to lunch. Oh, well, then let's go. See, so thinking about this, and I say it that way because with our cuisine, it was beans, rice, fideo, maybe tamales during Christmas, maybe menudo. We didn't have tacos and tostadas. I didn't even know what a taco was, let alone a tostada or a burrito, because we didn't have those. Yes, we ate them, but that's, we didn't have them. The school I went to was a parochial school, and if you spoke Spanish, they literally punished you. So the more north we came, our community came, the more acculturated we became. And I'll side story on that one. I was doing some work in '74 in the Arkansas Valley, and I was helping this community put a clinic together. After the meeting, and I was a community organizer. So after, and that's when you get the community to speak for themselves. And so I was there and I was sitting on my hands, which means I can't talk. Long, short story. I had to get up and make a presentation because we weren't selling. This doctor comes up to me and he says, Carlos, where did you learn to speak English? And so well, without an accent. I was floored. I couldn't believe that. But let me go back to, so anyway, my mother said, well, let's go. So I went ahead and went with her, and I liked what Corky was saying. I understood where he was coming from, and I got involved with him in 1966. I'm one of the founders of the Crusade for Justice, and Corky is actually my compadre. He was sponsored by, my son was baptized. He took my son to church. So anyway, I got involved. We got involved in a lot of activities. And then he started a play called The Revolutionist. And The Revolutionist, the beginning and the end were the prologue and the epilogue of his poem, Yo Soy Joaquin. So a lot of people just assume Yo Soy Joaquin was born and raised, or that's where it originally came from. So I started, people, I don't know about you, but they always say, when did you decide to become an artist? Well, let me tell you, I never decided I'd become an artist. I did not even think about becoming an artist. When I was in high school, they told me I was not smart enough to go to college, so I went to trade school in the evening. Went to parochial school, high school, had a job, went to night school. Emily Griffith learned how to weld. And then the last year I was, the instructor asked me if I would teach some of the students, and I did. And in the process, I accidentally started doing metal sculpture. And that's what I done originally. So anyway, I was always looking for venues to open. I started doing what we call sidewalk shows. All the little community centers, all the little shopping centers used to have little sidewalk shows. And I started doing that in '66. And so anyway, when Corky put on his play, I says, Corky, how about if I set up an art exhibit in the basement, and then during intermission, people can come and hopefully we can sell some artwork. So he gave me permission to do that. So when we bought the building at the Crusade, I went to him and I says, Corky, we had to set up an art gallery. I'd like to set up an art gallery. He says, pick your room. So me and my friend I started to put it together, and then there was a young man, Moses Sanchez. He came and helped me, and we put it together. We painted everything, the walls, and that's how the gallery started. So we opened up in 1968, and it ran for about 10 years. I left the Crusade in about 1971. Before I do that, though, but I was involved with Corky when we went to the Poor People's Campaign. And a lot of people don't realize the significance of the Poor People's Campaign and Corky Gonzalez. The second thing was I was involved in the war on poverty. And a lot of people don't realize, but most of the Chicanos that did get an education, professionals, they went to school, to college, and the money came from the war on poverty. So I was involved with that one so I left the crusade and got involved with other projects, and then I was staff aide for congressional staff for Comstor and Pat Schroeder, and then in about 77 or so, Corky called me up and said, "We're going to close the gallery. Would you take all the artwork and distribute it back to everybody else?" I said, "Sure." So with that in mind, the Jacinto Quirate, who put out the first book on Chicano art, was in town, and we went to go visit him. And from there, I met a number of other people, and CHOC was supposed to be a community, an organization, Chicano Humanities and Arts Council. So it became a council, and it was founded by Lalo Delgado, who was a poet. We had somebody doing mass media. We had Enrique Montoya doing dance, national dance theater. He was originally with Corky's nephew, and he left them and he started the National Chicano Dance Theater. That's how CHOC got started. And working for Pat, I wrote a letter to NEA asking for funds for this group of people. I didn't become part of it because it would have been a conflict of interest, but I was there trying to organize it. We got funded, and that's how CHOC got started. And then eventually, in 77, I was a trustee of the Denver Art Museum. And fortunately, through Jacinto Quirate, my name was given out, and we met with UCLA for 5 years to start and planned the CARA, Chicano Art, Resistance and Affirmation. And at that particular time, the curator for the Denver Art Museum that I had met, Diane Vanderlip, she didn't believe there was such a thing as Chicano art. So, I remember there was a lady who worked for the Denver Art Museum. We became very good friends, and long short story, she said, "Carlos, I was in Chicago, met with the folks, and they haven't heard from Denver." So the Denver Art Museum was in transition, and they had an acting director, Louis Story, and I think that his relatives were from New Mexico. And so I went to Louis and I said, "Louis, they've been trying to get a hold of Denver, and they have not responded." I remember it was the last week of June. And I says, and they're going to be closing pretty soon. And, can you do something? He says, "Carlos, give me a week." So I called up the following week, at the end of the week, and UCLA, and I said, Denver Art Museum should be getting a hold of this. They already have. They've asked all for information. We're giving it to them now. Everything's going to be happening. Denver became the first venue after the opening of UCLA at the Denver Art Museum. We had more Chicanos go to the opening of the Denver Art Museum than they had in the history of the museum. And we had organizations doing their special sponsor shows, and it ran for a while, for really a great while. So that was important for us to understand that it's not been an easy task. Okay, now we can start on that.
I've been going through the images that you gave me. So here we could start with your artwork.
That's one of my first sculptures. That was a chola. Okay. This is the metal sculpture that I've done. It's a cigarrero, a New Mexico buffalo hunter. This one right here was that I had done. It's a family, and I'm looking to the future, and it has to do with health. Without health, we'll not have a future for our family and our children.
And what year were these?
Let's see, that one would probably be about 74 or 5, something like that. This was, it's called El Santo Niño de Atocha. And tell you how I happened to do this one. My nephew came to visit my mother, and he parked in there and he changed his muffler and he came and visit my mother and then he left and he left the stuff on the floor in the front. Called him every day, come pick up your junk. Like, I'll be there. But finally, at the end of the week, I picked it up, was going to dump it in the trash, and started to see stuff from the muffler. He changed his muffler. And it took me like 9 months for, I'd work on it, stop, work on it, stop. But the skirt is the muffler end, the chrome. The body is part of the muffler, and then the head is extended from the muffler to the manifold. The crown is a gas cap, and then I use other parts from the car, and that's called a Santistevan de Tocha. And this was in the kind of exhibit, and Congresswoman Pat Schroeder donated this to the Smithsonian as part of their collection. But that was done probably I started it probably in the 70s. In the late 60s, early 70s. So it took me a while to put it together. I don't have what I would consider an art training. I just started doing it. And well, I was doing the El Gallo, and that was the name of the gallery at the Crusade, El Gallo. And then in 1969, they had the youth conference, and that's when Aztlán became popular. So I added name. So the 1969, the gallery was named El Grito de Aztlán. And during that period, some of the reporters, and God bless them, they were mostly female reporters who looked at us and gave us openings. And they gave me a number of publicity. They sent me some artwork. And there was a show in Santa Fe when it was going on. And so I read the show, and I knew nothing about colonial New Mexico art, nothing. So I read this, and I'm reading it, and all of a sudden, I come across the first native-born Pantero was Fresquez. Most of the original were all Catholic and Spanish padres. They were the original ones, but he was the first. But my paternal grandmother was a Fresquez. And I found somebody, because nobody I know, immediate or extended family, even done any artwork, let alone considered even showing their art. And so I started researching colonial New Mexico art. And that's what this is all about. And I started showing with the Colonial New Mexico Art Society in 1977. And the more I researched, and I started doing this wood. Okay, good. So with that, they use, with the Colonial New Mexico Art Society, it's special wood, so they don't use everything. It's aspen, pine, cedar, and cottonwood. So I've tried to maintain that venue of using just that kind of material to do my santos. This one right here is one of my first sculptures that I'd done in a kinetic. And it was sort of, and I've been doing kinetic work, so it's been interesting. But then this is my low rider. So, and if you look at that, that's a Sacred Heart, but it's a car at the same time. And these are my found objects, and I started doing found objects because I had done the metal sculpture, and this one is called Uncle Junebug. My brother, he was 10 years older than me, and he mentored me. He really pushed me, made me, keep on doing my artwork. So this is being named after him, and it's a Miss Butterworth bottle is the Virgin. And then I used a TV antenna. So this is part of my found objects of with liturgical arts. And then I started doing altars. So this was one of my contemporary altars. I couldn't show this in Santa Fe, but these are pieces that I would, so I would do colonial, and then I'd switch over to to keep myself going. some artists will start a piece of artwork and they'll do it till it's finished. With me, I'll start a piece and then maybe I'll just put it aside. Maybe 3 or 4 months later, I'll pick it up again. So some pieces maybe take me 2 years to do it only because I don't want to push myself, because I find that if you do that, sometimes your work just doesn't happen. This is the show that we're in right now together in Colorado, in Fort Collins, and this is my cholo. This one right here, I started in 1999. There was a liquor company in Florida that put out a bid. They were doing a special show on their liquor. So I thought, I think I'm going to try that. So I had got a loafer and I made a car out of it. And in the back, I put this bottle. So part of it. And I came in second place. So that started me on doing shoes. And then in 2000, Phoenix started put together some 2 volumes on Chicano art. And they had a call for artists. I think they had 1,500 artists that applied. Out of that, they picked out 96, and Fresquez is part of that. There were 5 of us from Colorado that were in that show. In 2001, they decided they were going to have an auction. So I thought, you know something? I think I'll try one of my shoes. So I went ahead and took a shoe, and they asked me, and Sotheby's was auctioning them off. So I thought, well, I wonder how much I should put this, and I'd done the shoe. I said, $350, it's a loafer, I put wheels on it. What the heck? So it was auctioned off and it sold for $850. And the person that put the book together, Gary Keller, his wife bought that. And they used me in a couple of their posters. And I said, I'll be darned. So this one right here is my Huarache shoe. And last year, the Denver Art Museum done a show on low riders. And again, Fresquez and I were in the show. It originated in Arizona. I think it went to New Mexico or Texas, and then they done one in Denver. And then, and it was great. And I had only one piece. And so after the show ended, a couple of months later, the curator called me up and said, Carlos, are you interested in selling your piece? Sure. Well, how much you want for it? And I said, well, I put a value of insurance value of, I think, $1,700, and that's what I want for it. She said, okay. So they picked it up. So it's part of the Denver Art Museum permanent collection. This right here is a timbrario. All of this is colonial New Mexico art. And on the far side there, that's my daughter's work. My son does painting on wood, on hide, buffalo hide. My daughter does straw applique, and then I do colonial the wood carving. This right here is called a timbrario, and I don't know how much time I have, Fresquez, but let me know.
I don't have a clock, so.
This right here is in New Mexico. When the priest came into New Mexico, the king paid the brothers to evangelize the Native Americans. So the settlers only had 3 priests, or Albuquerque, Santa Fe, and Santa Cruz, which is outside of Hispaniola. Those were the only 3 priests to evangelize for the Hispanics of New Mexico. The rest of them were all in the villages. So in about 1825, 30, the group started a Confradia Nuestro Padre Jesus, the Confederation of our Lord Jesus Christ of Nazareth. And little villages, but people once a family became too big, then the children had to move to find their own farm. So little villages would start and they would have a church immediately. And it was named after a saint. And the only time the priest went to go see these communities was the feast of that church. So that the people never saw a priest but once a year. So the hermanos, they became they made people go to church every Sunday. They prayed. They didn't say mass. They didn't even try to say mass. They just prayed. And then during Lent, they would practice the whole during Lent. And on Good Friday, they would sometimes do the Stations of the Cross, and they would have someone carry a cross. Well, on Holy Thursday, they would do what was called teneblas, and it would and that's what this would call it. Was in English, it's tenebrae. Well, what I done with this is I took and I put the Stations of the Cross on that so that you could do the Stations of the Cross, and it has 13 candles, and each candle was, so you're in this little tiny chapel. The only thing is on is this tenebrae with all the candles. And as they pray, they put out a candle until all 13 candles are out, 12 candles, except the one at the top. And the reason they put out the candles is to signify that the apostles deserted Christ. So they would, but the last one was Christ. So they would take the last one and they would go to this little anteroom, close the door, and all of a sudden this little chapel is completely closed. And all of a sudden they start making this fabulous noise to scare the blessings out of you. That what the key was, that when Christ died, supposedly the curtain fell, the earthquakes, and so they were suggesting that that's what the Nebulizer was all about. And they would do a mentraca, make noise makers. So that's what that tenebrae is about.
Thank you, Carlos. I thought we'd hold questions till the end. So if you have something that's so deep inside you, you'll have to use your memory. Try to remember to ask later, if you don't mind. Next, we have Cindy. I met Cindy as a student, and I was just really impressed with her work and her history, actually. She really created work about identity, and it was just really amazing, soulful artwork that just really commented on her experience, and they're very moving. And so I thought it'd be important to share her work here. And by the way, when Malville, when Katie, Brandon and I got together to decide this, we talked about what should this be. And I thought it would be nice to have someone that has this history of Denver and Chicano art, which is Carlos, somebody younger, which are these two, and then somebody older and has a similar experience, kind of as in between. So Cindy, I've always been so impressed with your work and yourself. So with that, I'll go ahead and start here. So
duality has always been, so I think it was 2003 when I walked into a painting class with Carlos. And when if you go to the next one.
oh, yeah.
So I was born in California, and then when I was about 4 years old, my dad's dream was always to go back to Mexico because he was an immigrant. And at 4 years old, I started school in Mexico, and I loved it. It was my home. So at the age of 17, my dad is like, let's go back. And I'm like, back where? All I knew was Mexico. I was 4 years old. All I spoke was Spanish, a little bit of English here and there. And my dad is like, well, you were born in the United States. And I was like, so what? Like, this is my home. And he was always like, I want something better for you. Your sisters are in the United States. We have to go back. So I cried my whole way here. So this piece on the right, it's my journey from California to Mexico and the Mexico to United States. It's like I crossed the border twice. Um, so, and that's my dad right there. I lost him 2 years ago, but you know, he's the reason why I'm here. So that was a big thing, walking into a classroom at 17 years old in a high school, not really being comfortable with the language. So like my first experience right away, geography class, I got kicked out of class for not speaking English. And this was 1998. So to me, that was hard. So I walked back to the counselor office in tears. And she's like, okay, well, let's just put you to ESL. And I'm like, so this is going to backtrack me. And then she's like, probably, you'll probably have to take an extra year of high school. So in tears, I went home and I cried. And then I looked at my schedule. Everything was ESL except one class, art. I didn't need any language for that. So came back to school the next day, walked into the art class, and I didn't have to say anything. All I had to do was create. So that was when I was just connected to art, and in such a way where it was like my survival skill. So forward to that, I graduated, started that class with Carlos, and just started exploring really like where I fit in. I wasn't Chicano. I was Mexican, but I was also born in the United States. So it was always that duality that I kept fighting for. And I remember this when discovered chalk. Somebody told me about chalk and they're like, oh, you're going to love it. So I walked in there and I was just like, I feel all these same feelings, but I can't connect. And then I found this print by Arlette Lucero, and it was called La Chicana. And I looked at it and I'm like, well, I'm not a Chicana, but it's a woman standing in the middle holding a heart, and around her are all those dualities that I was dealing with. So I just completely connected with that. And for the next one. So I started exploring my duality as a woman, but then later on, I had to drop out of school, but I came back.
Yeah.
And then it was right before the pandemic, and Carlos was like, you know, I have a sewing machine. And I was like, oh, I love sewing. And then he's like, well, you know, I have a sewing machine. And I'm like, okay, Carlos. And I kept painting. And then he's like, well, there's a sewing machine. And I'm like, okay. So he let me borrow it because we closed down the pandemic. And that's when I did my first textile pieces. And I mixed that love for painting that Carlos gave me with just the softness of fabric and the idea that I grew up learning how to sew from my grandmother. So that was a big part of Mexico that I brought with me. And I just started sewing, and then I started telling my story, and it was a way for me to heal because I never talked about it. I mean, crying all the way here and, you know, just looking at my dad and be like, I understand that this is what we needed to do. And as an adult, I talked to him about it, and he was like, I didn't know I hurt you this much. And I'm like, you didn't hurt me, but it was hard, you know? So that's where this piece came through. So that's my 4-year-old self, my young adult, and then my adult part, and we're all connected. So it's always that heart and that connection with like our past selves. And then the bottom is kind of like the trajectory from like the taco, the donut, you know, la concha. So it's just like that duality that I've always, it's been always in my art. My self-portrait right here, that was during the pandemic. And that's when I started looking at the nopal because I went back home and noticed that every corner there was nopales. And it brought me back to being 4 years old and just running down La Sequia.
Yeah, when I told you there's a sewing machine, you said sew.
Yeah.
I said, yeah, sew.
This was a series I did. It was called Code Switch. And it was more exploring my identity through my family and how I always have to, like, I was really hurt with my father when he moved me here. But then I realized once I had my daughter that I understood why he did it. And I understood the importance of wanting more for your children. And then I just started thinking about all these stories I hear from other immigrants. And it's always on our focus. Like, we're always thinking of those people that depend on us. So I have my daughters right here on the top. And it's that she's my priority right now. And I understand how parents. And then the bottom part is actually inspired by one of your pieces, the running family. But I represented more of myself in it. So my daughter and then me, and then the lucha libre, because we're always luchonas. We have to keep fighting. And the piñata is more of like breaking those boundaries, and knowing that it's okay to be Mexican and it's okay to speak Spanish. So yeah. And then I also do a lot of feminist themes, and I always go back to that print from Arlette, and I don't think she's here, but you guys know her. It's that duality, and it's interesting that the way we take religion, but we also create it as our own. As Chicanas and Mexican Americans, and as women, we're always compared to La Virgen de Guadalupe. We always have to be pure. And it's almost like we're walking around blind. So that's where this piece came from. And also the mask, I like using masks a lot because I feel like as women, we wear a lot of masks depending on where we're at, how we're supposed to behave, how we're supposed to fit in, and just how we grow. And there's more fabric and thread. So yeah, it's after I got that sewing machine, I was just like, wow, it's like drawing. And I just kept exploring that, also mixing the thread and the drawing and the painting, and just doing that layering and just being so connected to it, because every single piece has to be done in such a way that it really connects with you. And this portrait is of a DACA recipient that I was able to work with the Boulder Museum of Modern Art. She told me her story, and I interpreted her story, and I connected so much with it that I became really interested in telling other people's story, because even though we all immigrated, we all came from different places, we all kind of connected in such a way. Like I think of Chalk and I think of Carlos and just our language, you know, like me coming here not speaking the language, and then people here speaking the language but not being able to use it, like not being able to speak Spanish. So just like, even though we're different generations, we've all gone through that identity. Like, how do we find ourselves?
And I'll go back. So now that you have utilized this sewing machine, I should say,
So
are you glad you,
I'm glad I did.
oh, good.
Yeah, I love it.
All right. And again, if we could hold the questions at the end, I originally thought we'd have questions right after each talk, but talking with the team here, we thought we'd just hold them till the end. Next, we have Abraham.
Yes.
Abraham, also a former student, and watching him in class, I just like, where did this kid come from? I was just so impressed with his work and telling me his story as well, because I loved in class hearing where students had come from, their experiences, and I manifested that into, you know, understanding them and trying to get into their soul or mind and to help guide or mentor them. And so with Abraham, it was just so easy to do because I saw myself in him, you know. And although he's, you know, much more handsome than I ever was, it's like it's just amazing work, man. I mean, you'll see in a second here. It's just so impressive, and he's not afraid to push boundaries. And so with that, introduce Abraham Mejia Rameriez.
Thank you. So first, yes, Carlos was a big mentor in my life. He taught me how to use a hammer. And I don't know, he's just been a great resource and really, really helpful for me. A little bit of background about myself is I am first generation Mexican American is how I label myself. So my family is from Zacatecas, Mexico, and it's central Mexico for those who may not be aware of where it is. And then they came here. I think their first day in Colorado was the day the Columbine shooting happened. And we've been here ever since. And that kind of has always influenced me in my life, kind of my parents' story. I spent my summers in Mexico as a child and still do and go there every year. And I kind of started to look at my identity and who I am as a person and broke it up into 3 parts. I am Mexican, I am American, and I'm queer. And how does that affect who I am in my everyday situations? How do I interact with people? Code switching, all of that stuff is kind of what I started to look at. And so this is my thesis project. This is my baby from last year. It's called the Pink Chadro. And in this installation, I looked at all 3 parts of my identity and was really interested in like theories on hybridity by like Homeo Baba, stuff like that. And this first part that I'm going to talk about is my pink chadro suit. For those who might not know, a chadro is basically the closest comparison is a Mexican cowboy. They're not the same. It is a little, iffy on comparing them, but that's the closest similarity. These suits are like mariachi suits, but they're a lot more ornate and colorful, and they come in every color of the rainbow except for pink. And I was kind of looking at this like masculine cowboy figure and kind of questioning how that interacts with like a queer person. If someone is in a chadro figure, are they still masculine if they're a feminine presenting person, stuff like that. And so I made a 3-piece tailored suit to my measurements. It's like a glove, she's custom. And I made it out of pink faux suede. And yeah, I just wanted to explore that kind of machismo questioning ability in this, I guess. And if we go into the next part, this is my belt that I made with the suit. So it's a belt that I bought in Jerez, and it was from a local artisan there. And then I just switched out the belt buckle with a ceramic belt buckle that I made in the style of Talavera. And it reads Amor es Amor, which means love is love, because I wanted it to be kind of a celebration, not something super negative, which we'll see in the next slides. These are my slur vessels, and I kind of compared the ceramic body to my own body and how things that people say kind of stick with you and follow you throughout life. So these are all slurs that I've been called. They range from like, or I'll just read them. Joto, faggot, maricon, terrorist, and tourist in Spanish. So these are all things that I was called, and I did them in 2 separate styles. So the white and blue pottery is, again, that Talavera pottery, which has history in like China and Middle East and in Spain, and then eventually made its way down to Mexico and like Puebla. And it is pottery that I grew up with, but it wasn't anything that was seen super commonly in the region of Mexico that my family's from. We typically would see stuff like the brown pottery, which is the barro, and these are water jugs. And I grew up drinking from them. I had a little one in my room. They naturally cool the water just because they're porous and it holds water. So it just naturally cools, and they're used a lot in that specific region because it's dry. And I wanted to kind of integrate both of them into my work because they, when you think of Mexican pottery, you probably think of Talavera, but then there's also the underlying not as popular ones that are from the region. And yeah, when I first made these, I spent probably, I think I started the suit in 2022. I wanted to make it since like 2021. And then the pottery took me about a year to make. When I first made the first slur vessel, which was that tiny little white and blue one in the middle, as I wrote the first word, I got really, really uncomfortable. And I was like, oh, wow, this word is still like, it's not something I don't go around saying it. It just made me really uncomfortable. And I was like, this is my thesis work. Why is it so uncomfortable? And it kind of just made me think about how these words like linger. And I'm sure we all have kind of trauma and baggage that comes along with it, which is why I wanted the pink chadro suit to be a lot more positive, right? And yeah, that was my thesis work, and I was really proud of it. And then if we go into the next slide, this is something a little more happier. So this is Popocatépetl and Itzapal. These are 2 paintings, and I made them, they're just acrylic on canvas. I made these in Carlos's class when I think the assignment was based on stories. And it's this Mexican folktale from Mexico City. And just to sum it up, it's basically 2 lovers. One of them's a warrior, one of them's like a high-ranking princess person. And someone lied to her, says that he died in war. She dies out of sadness. He comes back and finds her dead, and so he dies out of grief. And it's just about love and grief. And then they kind of pray to like the Aztec energies and gods and stuff like that. And they reincarnate them into this mountain range and volcano in Mexico City. And they're right across from each other, so that way they could always be together in the afterlife. And it's this really beautiful story. Growing up, I grew up with this folktale, but I would always see depictions showing European characteristics. So it'd be like a tall, you know, very muscular dude, like just like very glorified Western beauty stereotypes. And it was really important for me it's an Aztec folktale. So I wanted to do a little more research into getting a little bit more correct characteristics and research clothing and hair and stuff like that, and tried to find reference images that I thought were appropriate for the story. And yeah, I was just really, really proud of these. These were on display at the CVA, I think in 2021, a while ago. So yeah, they're my babies too. If we go on to the next one, I'm obsessed with this story, so I had to do it again. This was 2022. And I took a book binding class and also decided to make it. This is watercolor. And the photos don't do it justice. You have to open it on the back panels. Well, okay, you open the book, you can pull out the panels and they go to about this long. And on the back side, it says the story that I just said. As you keep unfolding them, they connect to each other and keep revealing sides. And it just paints like a big puzzle of a photo of the mountain range and the volcano. And then you open up the middle, it opens up to that first layer, and then you open it again and it is them kind of reconnecting in the afterlife, right? And then if we go to the next one, this is the mountain range and the volcano. So they're right next to each other. And yeah, just celebrating Mexican folktales is something I really love to do. If we go to the next one, this is also my baby. They're all my babies. This is my book of memories, and it's a Jacob's ladder toy. So growing up, when I would go to Mexico, I always had a Jacob's ladder. I called them, in Spanish, they're called tablitas. And I had a one that was just wood with like colorful ribbon. And then I still have this one, and I love it so much. It's bright colors and bright ribbon, and you just play with it and it falls, and I would play with it for hours. And yeah, it was just like made me happy. It was like one of the toys that I always like cherished. And talking about like childhood, I'm really blessed to have and lucky to have a good childhood. Not everyone is. And so I wanted to explore that with this ceramic Jacob's ladder. When you play with it, it's heavy. The blocks are pretty thick. And as you're playing with it, you're scared it's going to fall apart or break on each other as the tiles are hitting each other. And on the end, I added a little shelf. You can kind of see it in that top corner photo. There's a little shelf that has a little book that I hand stitched. It's about 1 inch and 2 inches tall, probably. And it's just a book filled with my childhood memories. So it has stuff from me and my mom walking to Dollar Tree and buying the really, really cheap art supplies. I left the little puff balls and put them on everything. I have stuff from me peeing on a ride in Disneyland. It's just like silly little things that I really, really cherish from my childhood. And on the top of the tiles, it has cyanotype images with rough edges, and the images are different childhood toys. So it has beads, it has monkeys, it has like little strings, just like a bunch of things you would find in a childhood bedroom. And yeah, this was just something, it was the first time I do something like this. And I don't know, I was just really happy. And it's based off of that toy that I mentioned that's really colorful. I like pulled it out and like matched the colors and matched the ribbon as best as I like hand painted the ribbon because I couldn't get the colors right. And I don't know, it was just like, yeah, I really like this one. So if we go to the next image, I'll talk about some other artists in the area. This one is actually, I think he's based in El Paso or Juarez, Mexico. But this is Jose Villalobos, and this is the installation de la misma piel. And he did these amazing, like his work is just amazing. Like look him up on Instagram. But he looks at queer culture with Norteño symbols. And so he's kind of doing similar stuff that I was doing. And I didn't know about him till like midway through my thesis. And I was like, where has this dude been? And these belts specifically, they have different slurs on them, and then the backside is like this like dyed hot pink. And then there was also, I only have 2 up, but there was a collection of 4 different belt buckles, metal belt buckles that he made, and the letters were JOTO, which is Joto. So it was just again confronting those like that machismo in Mexican culture and how femininity and queerness interact with Mexican things. Yeah, so if we go on to the next one, this is, I'm not going to read the title because it's, yeah, I'm blind and I will mess up the title. But this was in the Cowboy exhibition at the Contemporary Art Museum of Denver. And I got to see this right before they took it down in February, I believe. And you walk into this room and it's just a brightly lit, like hot pink room. And in the middle of the room, there's a screen that's like playing these 2 Chadro characters, and they're just like slapping each other's hands, slapping each other on the face, punching holes through the wall, and you can't look away. Like it's just, you're like, what is happening? And so when I got home, I like researched the artist and this piece specifically, and I found an article where the artist talked about when they were making this and finding people to commission the suits. They went to multiple different ones, and they all denied making a pink one. And just kind of going back to that thing that you won't see a pink chadro. It's not something you'll like just run into on the street. Speaking about pink chadro that I forgot to mention earlier is that there's a Mexican singer, I forget his name, but he was touring in the United States, so not even in Mexico. He was in New York, and he wore a hot pink chadro suit with sneakers, and he got so much backlash from, there was like articles written about how it's disrespectful and all this stuff. And it's just so, people are so defensive about this like Mexican icon, and like, why can't a queer person enjoy that celebration, you know? So we'll go on to the next one. This is Lizette. I'm lucky to be able to call her a friend. We were in class together, and she made this in class with while I was there. And just hearing her talk, if anyone knows Lizette or has seen her artwork, like she just like is so good at storytelling. She talks about her mother and her mother's story on her way here. And so these are all cyanotype images of her mom. And yeah, if you go on to the next one, these are also it's the same cyanotyped images, but they're on a folklorico skirt. And she just talking to her about her story and her mom's story and her experience as a Mexican American woman is just like something like you should talk to her. Look at her website. She has a project about tamales that's like amazing. So she like always has inspired me throughout my college career and still inspires me. So love Lizette. And then the last, I think I have one last artist if we go into the next one. We'll just like skip through these like first 3 photos. But these are a collection of like ceramic items that she made. And she is also from Denver and is a tattoo artist. So this is Tamara. This is a collar and lily. And if we go into the next one, she does like very similar things. And then the last image I have in there is a belt that she made that's also in that Talavera style. Like I said, she's a tattoo artist, so she does do ceramics, but her main thing is a tattoo person. And on the last slide I have is her leather work. So it's more close to like flesh and skin. And these belts, I don't know if you can read them, but they talk about borders and has like Mexican experiences, but in a contemporary sense. And her work was something I also looked at during my thesis. And yeah, she has a lot of cool art. So yeah, and I think that's it. I think that's all I have. Yeah, there we go.
All right, well, thank you, Abraham. That was fantastic. Now I really miss school, you know? Well, I'll sum up the evening here, and then again, we'll open it for questions. I think we're doing okay on time, are we not? Okay, I grew up here. This was my neighborhood. Used to walk up and down these streets. The Museo de las Americas was J.C. Penney's. I got my first communion outfit there. I was baptized in the San Cayetano there, St. Catherine's there on campus when it was a church. I was born in 1956. And in 1974 or 5, the church was deconsecrated and they built another St. Cajetan's on West Alameda. And my grandfather passed away in 74. And it was one of the very last services in this church. They actually had a fence around it and they were going to tear it down. Luckily, the Chicano community said, no, you have to preserve the heart of our community. So in 1990, I created a piece, this piece based on the 10th anniversary of my wife and I being married. In a couple of weeks, we'll be married 44 years. So this was in honor of her. And it was inspired by these LA artists that I really hadn't discovered till later. And Frank Romero became a really good friend. Carlos Almaraz, I met him when Carlos Santistevan and I were in the Chicano art exhibit that he mentioned, the Denver Art Museum, the Chicano Art Resistance and Affirmation Cara exhibit. I met him in Los Angeles, just a really quick, brief handshake, and he passed away from AIDS. This piece is a City of Denver commission that I received back in 2009. The Westwood community really had no public art in their neighborhood except for a few murals scattered about. And so they wanted to create a gateway piece. And the city had created this kind of concrete base that says, "Welcome to Denver," and then Morrison Road. And that part existed. So I had to create a piece that kind of complemented that shape. And so I call it a corrido para la gente, or a ballad for the people. It was really interesting creating this because I remember driving down this street. My grandfather lived on this street, and this is really honoring him. Played guitar. But I remember driving the street and I told my wife, sit next to me. I got this notebook and I want you to write names. I'm just going to write words. I'm just going to scream things out and just write them down as I experience the street to create this piece. So I'm driving down the street and I see some guy walking down the street and I just yell out whatever, made up a name for him. And then there's a guitar shop there, a bicycle shop. At the very end of Morrison Road, Alameda, they sell a quinceañera outfits and such. And so when I got home, I got this list from my wife and I went through and I just started piling all this stuff into a mound. And I just thought of the Mexican markets that I experienced, and some of the markets there on Morrison Road as well. And I just started piling up these objects. And I narrowed it down to this guitar, bicycle, and a crown for the quinceañera. And it's the crown of the neighborhood. And then I put a shovel in there because I think it's important to put down the shovel, stick it in the earth, and stop working sometimes and relax and enjoy what life has to offer, especially what you are all doing right now. You're here listening to these amazing artists. You're taking time to get something, hopefully enrich yourself. And that's what we need to do, is that shovel to me symbolizes that, just putting down the work and enjoying family life or whatever it is. And that's why there's a strand of papel picado, which is actually all steel. And these are kind of the inspiration. Klaus Oldenburg, I've always loved those gigantic sculptures that I've seen in New York and around. And then the Mexican market is just piled with, just overlayered with layers and layers and layers of things. I just always love that. So that was the inspiration. Back in 1999, I was, really looking at my ancestry and realizing, how indigenous I am. And the circle is really important to indigenous people. So I said, I should start doing these paintings, circular paintings. So I got a piece of masonite or plywood. I got a compass, drew a really nice circle, and I got my jigsaw and I started cutting it. By the time I finished, it's like not quite circular. So I made it about 12 inches round. And then I had this epiphany, like, why am I cutting a 12-inch circle when there's already vinyl albums that exist and I can paint on them. So that's what I started doing. Back then, a CD was very important. Vinyl was just discarded. I found them everywhere in garage sales and people just giving them to me. And so I started painting and printing on vinyl albums. The long playing, LP, LPs, they're called LPs. And so those were inspired by the psychedelic posters that I grew up with in the 60s and 70s. And the other fun stuff that you can take. Damien Hirst, I saw these much later, and I just realized like, oh, he's doing these spin paintings, which I hadn't noticed. And then I would combine with graphics from, lowrider culture. The skeletal figures are Jose Guadalupe Posada of Mexico. The car culture, Von Dutch, and Big Daddy Roth and such. I started putting those images into screen prints and printing, or into screens and started printing on with them. And then my punk influence was out when I was a Metro student in the same room that I taught in. I think it's still 176. What is it? 172. Is that the room? 172. The painting class? I already forgot the number. See, it's already. But yeah, when I was in class, that you guys were in the same class, I was in there as a student. You're like your age, if you could believe I was young, and we were allowed to play music. So I would bring in vinyl albums, and the punk scene had just come in. So I started, playing some Ramones and Clash, Sex Pistols, and the Buzzcocks and such. And we put that on. Everyone get a chance to play some music. And so I love music. Even when you guys were in school, I love music playing when you're painting. And so I started doing these kind of cutout collage pieces based on the punk scene. And so I did this parody of Shepard Fairey, his piece that he did for the Sex Pistols. Or no, that was Jamie Reed, sorry. Jamie Reed did Sex Pistols artwork. And and when I was in the 70s as well, I remember these Christians would come up and talk to me and try to convert me to Christianity and such. I'm Catholic, by the way, but they say that after they would converse, they'd always say, "Praise the Lord." And I always thought they said, "Praise the Lord," like a lowrider. And I said, "Praise the Lord." So that always stuck with me. So that's when this kind of fused one day. And it's like, oh, there it is right there. I'll just take from Sex Pistols, Pretty Vacant. Instead of two buses, I'll put low riders, and it will praise the Lord. And so I really was influenced by Cholo or Chicano graphics, lowrider cars, which I spray painted for like 15 years. I spray painted automobiles and industrial as well. Right out of high school, when I was 18, I got a job with my uncle spray painting a lot of those custom vans, lowrider cars, motorcycles, all that. I got so burned out with it, and I still get asked, "Would you paint my car?" No, I'm 15 years. 15 years was enough, man. I'll never do that again. Except I have done, car pieces, car hoods and such. And so I'll leave it there. So now, do we have any questions for us? I know you've been dying to ask. Yes.
Since they mentioned the gallery that you're starting, I'm just curious about that.
Oh yeah, Cecily had. I'm glad you mentioned that because I would have forgot too much 70s. As I always told my students, it's like, I'm so forgetful. 70s were great, but.
Yeah, where is it?
There's this. Well, I got to backtrack a little to get to your story, to get to your answer, to get to the answer. I was in bands in the 70s. I played drums, congas, and timbales, Latin percussion. And I've always loved being in a band and a group and, working together as a team. And so when I stopped playing in bands, I just thought, God, someday I'd love to form an art collective. And so in 1999, there's 3 of my artist friends, we're all Metro alum, and my former students as well. We rented a studio together, and we formed this collective called Los Fantasmas. It's, if you remember, like you were talking about almost being disappeared, not existing. Somewhere, one of you said something about, Carlos, about we're like ghosts. Yeah. And that's what Fantasmas means, a ghost. So we formed this group called Los Fantasmas because if you look around, if you go to a restaurant, many of the servers are white, but then you open the kitchen door, they're all brown. You go to a high-rise downtown, you go into the office building, the receptionist is usually white, the owner is usually white. You come back after 5 o'clock when things close, you see many, I shouldn't say all, but you see many of the people coming to clean the offices, they're brown. And so it's like we're invisible as Chicanos. And this, I'm talking 1999, when this was my idea of naming our group, Los Fantasmas. So I thought we should make ourselves visible. We're not ghosts. We exist. We're here. And so with that preface, a few years back, Tony Diego, our director of Fantasmas, he was approached by Redline to say, Redline approached Tony and said, we have these empty spaces in Inglewood, and we want to put some artwork or galleries in there. Would you be interested in finding somebody to put some space? Because, well, we have a collective called Los Fantasmas, and we could definitely use it as a gallery space. And that's kind of how it came about. So it took about 6 months to a year to finally, like, okay, here it is. We kept hearing about it from Louise at Redline, and we finally in July got the space, and we opened it up on a shoestring. We got grant money. We were able to pay the rent for 1 year, so we're hoping to get more grant money. The gallery is located, and it's called Loya. It's the word for heart in the Nahuatl or the Aztec language. And it's Loya Art Space. It's located in Inglewood, where the old Museum of Outdoor Arts, there's this city center. There's like that light rail stop there and a big old fountain. We're right there on these empty storefronts that have been empty for 6 or 7 years. So they're trying to get activity there. And we actually have a Fantasma member here. Morgan is a new member. We started with 4 males for like, oh God, we started in 99 with almost 23 years. We were all male. And I just kept complaining to the other guys, like, we need to, mix this up a little more and get some females in the group. So we brought Grace Gutierrez in, Morgan and Micah, and Cindy is and isn't a member. She's eventually going to come in, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
But the invitation's to her. So that's kind of how it started. And so we're on a shoestring. We have no hours yet. We're meeting tomorrow night to discuss this, to see if we can have, where we can volunteer to have doors open and have set hours. But it's a really cool space. Right now we have a woman of color exhibit. I don't know, what was the name, Morgan? On the Rise, is it? Yeah, so we don't have hours. I think we have an Instagram, is that right? And so if you look that up, please join and you can get information there. But it'd be great for people to come and support and at least see the space. And we haven't even created a donation box, but we're gonna have to make a big one to go past a year. Hopefully we get grants coming in and we can go beyond a year. So that's, sorry for the long story, but that's how it came about. And thank you for mentioning that because I would have spaced out, you know. So, other questions specific to the artist especially?
Actually, I have one for Carlos. You had mentioned that you didn't grow up or you didn't pursue arts when you were in school. It wasn't something that you were sort of trained in. But I was curious if it was.
Okay, I'm sorry, I have a hearing impairment. I wear 2 hearing aids and I still.
Yeah,
When you were younger, you didn't pursue art or do a lot of art until. So I'm curious.
Tell me
what
what
kind
he's
of
saying.
interest-
I'm sorry, go ahead. Tell me what he's saying.
If when you were younger, did you pursue art or no?
No,
Yes.
actually, as I mentioned, when I was at high school, they told me I wasn't, and I believed them. I believed that I wasn't college material. So, as I said, I took a body and fender. I wanted to become a body and fender man. You know, we were into cars. I love cars too. So, in the process of making, well, the instructor asked me my last year. I think he had a son my age, so he sort of took me on, Mr. Overy. I never will forget the name. So he said, Carlos, he said, I've got this big body and fender class and I don't have time to teach these guys how to weld. Would you weld? Teach them how to weld. I'm a young punk kid here, you know, I could do that. Shit, no problem at all. So he gave me 4 guys. I didn't realize at the time, but they were rednecks from the word go. And they really had a hard time having this young punk Mexican teaching them how to weld. And I finally said, you know, did I know how to weld? I mean, instructors, I just started trying to teach them the best I could. And in the process of teaching them, I created my first piece of sculpture, which was the head of Christ. And it was about this big. And I should tell you, this was the Archdiocese of Denver gave it to the Pope, but that was my first tryout. And so after I'd done that one, I decided, well, I think I'll make a body for this head. So I had the head at home and I started making the body, got the body made, took it to school, went to attach the head to the body. The head was too big for the body. So I agonized for a month and a half. Do I cut the head, make it small to fit the body, or do I cut the body to make it big? All of a sudden, you know, like I say, a month and a half, 2 months later, ding, make a head for the body. I made a head for the body, so I had 2 pieces of sculpture. So my mother wanted me to go to college. I mean, she only went to 8th grade. I said, Mom, you have 3 other children and you picked the dumbest one of your children to go to. Mom, I'm not college material. She insisted. So I went to UCD as a special student. And I think it was my second year or so, I saw the catalog the instructor was teaching. He had metal sculpture. I'm going to take this metal sculpture class. So I went ahead, paid my dues, went down to and it was in the basement of Rampo, big like this. So I went over to him and says, you know, I want to learn how to metal sculpture. Oh, hey, great. She says, you're my first student. Well, come on, I'll show you our gallery. I mean, our studio. Okay. So he took me, and I don't know if you've ever been to the old building, but it's as you go up the stairs, there's this little door there. And it's about this big, half the size like this here, about this wide. And so he says, this is our welding studio. Okay, great. Walking out the door, hey, aren't you going to teach me how to metal sculpture? He says, I don't know how to weld. I says, well, what'd you offer the course for? Well, we have all this equipment, it's just going to waste. Okay. So I went ahead and, you know, I'd go get the key and he never knew if I was there or not. And again, I'm not understanding college. Professor don't care if you're there or not, but I didn't know that. So anyway, I done my first piece of sculpture. And I went back to the main studio. There was a table about this big, and back to the staircase, remember with the, that one right there. So that must have been well, anyway, that was in the 60s. So on the table there, and I grabbed him, and I said, I want constructive criticism. So he walks around the table, meek like little tontito. I follow him around. And he said, well, what do you think? And I said, well, I like this, this, and this, but I'm not sure about that. And he says, okay, well, we'll change it. Picked it up, went back to the studio again. Week and a half later, I came back, put on the table again. We done the same thing. Little tontito walked, but he was little dummy, it's tontito. So walked around again, and he said, well, what do you think now? I said, I think it's finished. Well, no, I says, no, I like it. He said, well, then you're finished. And he walks away. I don't know how to draw. Well, actually, I went to opportunity school to teach, to learn how to draw on Friday morning. And it was all these, everybody in that class were all senior citizens. They all wanted to be Grandma Moses. I was like, and I wanted to learn how to draw. So I went the first couple of classes. The third class, the instructor comes up to me and says, you have to paint. I want to learn how to draw. No, we don't paint. I mean, we don't draw, we paint. He gives me this list, oil colors. So I take and I buy all this stuff. I go to the next class and I'm using it sparingly, you know, and he comes over, he squeezes it, and I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, there's 25 cents worth of oil right there. There's another 10 cents. I mean, we spend like 20 bucks on this. And you squeeze it all in. Oh my God. Anyway, so I started painting, and I painted a few years, and then I quit. But the point that was my initial painting and drawing, and then I went back to metal sculpture and back to when I was at school. So that's how I started metal sculpture, and just finding peace. I would walk down the street and find a piece of something, and that's interesting. Pick it up, take it home, put it in the corner. Then maybe I may find something or may not, but that's how I built my metal sculpture.
Other comments or questions? Or we're right around 7:30, I'm guessing. Close. Other comments or questions?
Oh, you're too easy. Come on. Any question at all is fine.
All right, then. I guess there's none. So thank you all very much for coming again. Brandon, thank you. CBA, thank you.